Welcome. First off, this talk is made possible by the generous support of the Faculty of Fine Arts Orion Lecture Series, the Orion Fund. I want to acknowledge with respect that the University of Victoria resides on the territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanish peoples. The systems and values created to remove the land and culture from the stewardship of Indigenous people are still perpetuated everywhere. This perpetuation is both seen and unseen. These same systems have built a world in which only a few beings can thrive. We endeavor in what we do to fight what is seen and learn to see the unseen. There's great hope in the knowledge that although the present structures feel giant and immovable, it wasn't always this way. In fact, it hasn't been this way for very long at all. Amanda Boulos is a visual artist and educator based in Toronto. She received her MFA from the University of Guelph and a BFA from York University. She's shown at Rick Rhodes' DuPont Projects, at the Arsenal in New York, at the National Gallery of Canada, at the Annalee and Owens Gallery in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Boulos is the winner of the 20th RBC. So was that the last one? The very last RBC Canadian painting competition. Just a mic drop there. And recently the Isabel Pope Artist in Residence at NSCAD University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Amanda is also a founding member of one of, in my mind, the best things going as far as collective DIY artist-run culture in this country right now. It's really inspiring. However challenging it also is to do that work. It's a program, gallery space and collective project space that's called The Plum. And is also the programmer for the Toronto Palestine Film Festival. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really nice. Okay, is this working? I'm a little shorter than you. Still. Okay. Okay, awesome. Signal me if I'm not. All right. So I want to start off by continuing the land acknowledgement, but I also want to kind of wrap it up in a family history because my work is so much about identity and identity politics and space and land. But why not bring the two together? I also think it's super important to start off with the land acknowledgement today because I'm speaking about Palestine and its fight against colonialism, displacement, and erasure. Erasure and displacement and colonialism that is kind of seen daily, since the creation of the state of Israel. So I want you to, I want to, of course, welcome you to also personally think about your kind of history and in relationship to land and a land acknowledgement. I'm going to start. So my grandparents were displaced from Palestine during the Nakba in 1948. My grandmother from my mother's side was pregnant with my grandmother, the eldest, when they had to flee due to threats to their lives. They lived in Haifa, Palestine. My great-grandfather fled his home, taking only his essential belongings and an inventory of items he left behind in case they were stolen. They fled from Jaffa, Palestine. My grandparents and their relatives lived in a refugee camp called Dabaye. It was a Christian camp in Lebanon, or the camp, was called Dabaye, and it's in Lebanon. And shortly after, my parents and my family found a home in downtown Beirut in Lebanon as well. They then experienced and survived the Lebanese Civil War that broke out in 1975. And again, because of instability and threats to their lives, they fled once again in 1990 to Canada, and specifically residing on treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. So I'd like to thank the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, Chippewa, the land that is home to Métis, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississauga of the Credit, for taking care of the lands that we landed on when we needed safety and stability for our lives and our children. So for those of you who don't know what the Nakba is, I just have a quick definition here. So the Nakba means catastrophe in Arabic. It encompasses a time the Palestinians were exiled in large numbers from their homes by Zionist paramilitary and subsequent Israeli forces during Israel's creation between 47 and 49. And although the Nakba is centered around 1948, it's of course not confined to that year, since Israel continues to steal and occupy land today. Okay, I have this image up because I don't know, it says so much about colonialism and how Palestinian farmers and the Bedouin population are kind of going through the land through these kind of freeways to farm and to, you know, make a life that resembled pre-1948. Okay, so the work I do comes from a deep love for my family and our history. My work, of course, touches on Palestinian politics and Palestinian identities, and specifically diasporic Palestinian identities in Canada. The question I'm most interested in exploring is how identity can transform due to trauma, so war, displacement, and racism, and how imagery and visual culture play a significant role in uniting and developing a collective or individual identity. I'm going to be speaking around my work for most of this talk. I'm not going to be talking about paintings that you see, and I'm hoping you can make those connections, and I think it's way more valuable and fun to talk around work, right? But yeah, I want to begin with a Berger quote. So John Berger said in an interview that his work always revolves around immigration and displacement, and that he cannot get away from talking about exploring these territories because it's something, it is not something you choose, it's more of an obligation or a convention. I sympathize with Berger in that I too feel an obligation to question my family's experience of immigration and displacement. So I thought it would also be really interesting to take you through work in a timeline since my undergrad to kind of today. And I wanted to show you work that I did in undergrad because it's still quite relevant to the things I'm thinking about today. So yeah, before I really started getting into my thesis work at the University of Guelph, I was I was working with painting, and I still work with painting, and I was working with painting abstractly, as you can see on the projection here. This painting is called Tarred and Feathered, and it's the interior of my childhood home. The interior of the home, you can only see little bits of it. So the tiled floors, possibly a doorway. And I was thinking about my home and how it's built and laid out specifically in reaction to my family's history. So I could see that my home, when I was looking at it, kind of taking myself out of the home and observing it from the outside, there were, dozens of talismans in every corner of my home. So these were kind of evil eye talismans or images of the Virgin Mary. Blue beads were hung on each doorway. There were incense, there were, like weekly incense rituals, etc. And my mother specifically was very much protecting the home from evil, literally every corner of it. At the same time, I knew that my family had this complicated history and that they were really hiding it behind this very Western looking home, a kind of aesthetic that was just beige and white on beige and white. And the only evidence of that history was found in these kind of talisman, these rituals, these things that really held so much power that they, you couldn't hide them in a way. So I really, I thought it would be really great to bring these anxieties out visually. So all of these kind of surreal, kind of, hairy, clustered forms in this house are the visualization of those anxieties. This is also made using tar, and it's using insulator paper, so things you use to build a home. So that ties in to the work as well. I also wanted to make the painting resemble a dirty house instead of this clean, very Western cleanliness aspect that was present. Another undergrad work with the same theme is this one. Again, this is a really old painting, but I still visit it constantly, thinking about what I thought about, in my undergrad. It's funny how you change so much, but don't change at all. So this is an image of the 4 members of my family, and they're made of tar again. So just the stuff you buy at Home Depot to like repave your, driveway. And they created this, very bodily texture that I was drawn to. And these figures, their guts are spilling out, their hair is, kind of everywhere. They're almost animal. Okay, after undergrad. So I graduated from York and I rented a small studio in Toronto. There I experimented with different mediums and different painting methods. I was also seeing a lot of shows in Toronto and hanging out with graffiti artists, getting in trouble. And at the same time, I was reading some really great accessible scholarship because I didn't have my, library card anymore. So I dived into kind of Swana artists in general, and I was drawn to Mark Westmoreland, who wrote extensively about contemporary artists in Beirut, in Lebanon generally. So his writing in the Atlas Group and Walid Broad were really influential at the time. I didn't really get that exposure in my undergrad. I'm not sure why. Maybe I do know why. So yeah, he really got me thinking about identity and body and place and how important it was for an artist to think about those things. You all hear it constantly being in this program, but in 2013, it wasn't so much the case. So I wanted to be in dialogue with Westmoreland. His writing really influenced a lot of my early work, still does. And I wanted to be in conversation with these Swana artists, specifically in Lebanon, because my family came directly from there. I was also influenced by the work of Douglas Gordon. It's kind of a strange thing, but his 1993 video, 24-Hour Psycho, where he slowed down Hitchcock's 1960 Psycho to 24 hours, really made me think about time and how it works in painting and image. But more so, I was inspired by Philip Monk's writing on Douglas Gordon. I worked for the art gallery of York University in my undergrad, and you spend a lot of time just sitting, waiting for people to come to the gallery. And if you've ever been to the art gallery of York University, you know that there is a huge, beautiful bookshelf of contemporary writing by genius writers, including Philip Monk, and I would read them. And I would get freebies once in a while, which is great because I took them home and I still, visit them. Where am I here? So, and at the same time, I started volunteering for the Toronto Palestinian Film Festival. So seeing a lot of video and film and getting in touch with what people are working with and researching and, thinking about now, today, in the Swana region. Okay, so all of these got me to make these very small paintings. They're the size of literally my 2 palms. Most of the time, or actually in this series, I focused on family narratives that have been passed down to me. So I wanted to make history painting for myself and create a kind of personal archive. a visual archive, because that's kind of the way I see the world, I think, process, even in the act of making itself is, is the only way I could really comprehend anything. So, even reading, I have to move my hands. It's probably because I'm an anxious person, but it was my way of processing this huge kind of personal history. Or these, topics that are actually quite difficult to talk about. So the images ended up being very minimal, as you could see. They are abstract because I didn't have any photos to really riff off of. It was all oral, it was all spoken to me. And they didn't provide me with a lot of information because, again, a lot of the stories my family share with me are difficult to tell. So they come in little snippets. They come out in weird times. They come out as warnings or in urgent moments, like don't go out past 9 because blah, 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 and then you're just scared. So you don't want to ask anymore. Yeah, I still wanted to have a relationship with these stories and my family's kind of memories. So a lot of the memories shared, not all of them are intense or bad, but some of them were also really nice and joyful. I have a mix here to show you. But yeah, all of these stories were quite intense, like they were saturated, and I wanted to kind of capture that. For example, this is a narrative or like a little spew that my mother shared with me. It goes, I saw a man who got shot near the Roche while I was standing on my balcony. The Roche is this kind of natural monument on Beirut shore. It sits in the water. It has this kind of cute shape, and it's sometimes activated by, they add, or, you hang banners on it. It's a moment of pride for the nation. So yeah, I painted them for myself, again, to visualize the history, the conflict, but also to ask questions about the Lebanese Civil War, not directly to my family, sometimes directly to my family, but just for me to kind of find a kind of clarity in these things that my family just experienced in spurts. Yeah, so the paintings became a means of investigation. It gave me time and space to think about the stories. I started asking myself questions like, how did this affect my family's psychology, this one memory? Was it raining that day? Just little things. How did this person acquire a gun, which goes into kind of the politics and, who was dealing the arms. But I also repeated the image so that I can animate it very slightly, give it a little bit of life, even allow it to breathe. For me, this was the best part of this series. It also, changed how time worked in a painting. So this is where the Douglas Gordon, Philip Monk, film influences come in. I also noticed, when I doubled it, when I animated it, split second of an animation, a kind of GIF, it expanded the meaning of the work, using simply just time and movement. I made a whole series of these, and this is what I applied to my MFA with. I thought, no way, these little things, but I was, I was invested in where they came from and what they were doing for me. I got in. This is a nice memory of just my family jumping off of this national monument. So it goes into kind of the Mediterranean Sea, and it's a really nice. I don't think anyone does it now because they don't want to risk their lives. But this was a thing that was done even during war, where, all the young boys and some girls would go on top of this, climb up on top of this national monument, and then jump off of it. You'll see a little video of them doing that in a second. Okay. So in the end, and once the series was done, The images, of course, didn't provide me with all the answers I was looking for. Instead, they just allowed me to kind of sit with the questions and be comfortable with actually not having the answers. Yeah, finishing this series, I kind of didn't want to pry anymore. Didn't want to ask my parents any further questions or details. It almost felt unnatural in that exploration. I knew that these memories and the move to Canada was about forgetting their trauma. And I was okay with that. I think like a good thing. So yeah, I just wanted to respect that, but I also needed to digest these things that came out in my life for myself. And these paintings did that. Okay, so I'm going to show you the slide. So I also made video very briefly. I really should make more video, but I feel like painting, when you get into one medium, you just like can't stop, or at least that's how I feel. But I made this video for the same reason. I wanted to fill in gaps like visual gaps of family memories or family experiences before I was born. So I collected found footage off of YouTube and other kind of websites, and I put together a kind of just like a found jump cut version of my family, or I've adopted these people as my family who are jumping off of this rail ship or this national monument and the shore. For me, this gives me so much comfort to just see and to experience what they've experienced. So I'll let you watch it, and then I will talk about it in a bit. It is a little scary, so be careful.
بس اسمعني عم صرخ. يلا روح. ارجع اركض. عليكم تصحى واه يا حيوان تموت. يلا روح يلا سحور. هي لكن السحور يا خيي هذا اخبط من برا. يلا. انه اهبل هيدا. راح. That's good. يلا والله وحش. طلع بتصور ها؟ رح تكون نطة حلوة. يلا هات. عم بتسجل. الهواء الشرقي والغربي. وقف هنيك عادي، وقف هنيك يلا. بدي اشوفك انت عم تنزل يلا. راحة. يلا ايه. لو جربوها. الله يلا. الدنيا يلعب. مان كيف روح مصر
ايه
شوفوا قام يطوف ما عاد يحرك حاله.
معقول يعمل حاله هيك؟ غرق غرق ولا؟
لا ما غرق لا. يعني يسبح.
والله غرق.
تعرف انه الضربة
اجت على راسه.
الصدمة اجت على راسه مزبوط.
غرق بس.
لا طيب.
غرق غرق.
تمام.
I also try to match up the timeline. So finding these videos that were from like the 80s, 90s, because the language matched also my family's language. So you could imagine they leaving a place in the 90s. The Arabic is so different now if you go back to Lebanon. Like my family has kind of like a bottled up an Arabic that is from the 80s and 90s, and it hasn't changed even today, but in Lebanon the Arabic's totally different. So yeah, all of this kind of again gave me comfort and familiarity, and allowed me to understand my family better in a lot of ways. Okay. Oh, and also, you know, the work it is not only about me reconnecting with my family. It does kind of talk about the kind of Arab man and the, you know, stereotypes attached to the Arab man, always wanting to be a hero. And for me, it also kind of talks about the mentality of not worrying so much about your life because there's a war happening and you could, you know, die at any corner. So this thrill of jumping off of the cliff is the chances of losing your life is tiny in comparison to what's happening on land, right? So yeah, now this is not taking place because you know, I guess, you know, the risk is some of the highest. So yeah, okay. So yeah, when I got to grad school, I wanted to continue this exploration of family oral recordings, or oral stories. But I had many questions for myself and different questions. They were, what is the importance of working with family narratives? How can they be generative? Can I work with narratives that are so minimal, misplaced? And why is it important for me to make paintings about my family's oral stories? I also wanted to maintain this kind of fragmentation with these narratives as a way of respecting their current archived state. So the video too, again, sorry, I should mention, it's fragmented, you know, it's kind of pixelated and it really like, it works for that kind of displacement or this clarity or uncertainty of the actual events. So yeah, I wanted to see like, how can I respect those kind of fragments or those like breaking apart of narrative and memory. I also wanted to be a little more academic, of course, going to school, you want to study, and, you know, allow the narratives to kind of be bigger than themselves and speak to larger politics, again, around race, identity, and land. I don't know if I was able to answer any of the questions or address these politics in school, but you know, I discovered some great things along the way and I can share those. Okay. So yeah, I think this painting was a kind of a turning point, but also some of kind of the most academic work I've done to date. Yeah, there's you'll hear why in a second. But yeah, this painting is called Pouring Boys, and I made a series of them. A lot of them, like a lot of them, they came quick. And this painting kind of reacts to family stories. It started with a family story of hiding in a basement. A lot of, my mother, most of the stories come from my mother saying, you're so lucky that you don't ever have to hide in a basement. And behind walls, to avoid, of course, violence and death. And I was reading all of this stuff on Palestine and how it was colonized and, getting into the books. And I came across writing about how the actual physical land was taken away, first by Britain and then Israel, and it's because, well, the paper was talking about how modern cartography and aerial photography was like crucial to, just taking land. So the accuracy of a map was key, because modern map making, the land of Palestine was, the maps of Palestine were based off of biblical tales and were very romanticized, imagined, to suit kind of the Bible, of course. So yeah, I was thinking about horizon lines and maps and certain sight lines, comparing my family's vantage point from basements to being above the horizon. A slogan that really got me thinking was, airplanes can control the desert. So yeah, with more vision or with certain vantage points, there is power. So yeah, as a result, I made these paintings that had these kind of grid lines where the horizon touched the very tops of the painting. And so the viewer is forced to look down on the landscape, to really analyze the landscape. But what they see are blobs and abstract forms. So there is this kind of rebellion to the mapping. So yeah, so there is no like real dreamy horizon you can escape to. There's no kind of, when you're looking right at the grid, I like to think that the mystery is kind of gone. You could see everything, nothing's kind of overlapping the other. And you're forced to measure space and lay witness, which was important. So yeah, this kind of eye in the sky, the kind of drone kind of conversations. So yeah, the drones kind of hover in the landscape. And I actually started to relate to the drone. So I was thinking about the drone as myself, as a person who was looking at these histories and these family stories from a distance. And I wanted to kind of show this this plane as a figure. So it has these kind of leaking fluids, it has these boobs, it's, it's kind of grotesque and almost unthreatening, but, threatening in its kind of bodily form instead of its kind of angular war usual form. I also wanted to have, or allow the viewer to kind of feel like there's something about to happen in them too. So there's this like anticipation, or you're going to witness something happening, because we're so used, or I guess now we don't really see these images, but we're so used to seeing, planes dropping things on land, and I wanted that too. But yeah, I was really relating to the drone because, when you're in school, you feel guilty for everything you do. So, I was feeling guilty being the image maker, the dissector, making imaginary images of real things. if I can't do it. So yeah, so while in grad school, I started immersing myself also in dialogues around oral archives and thinking about the archive. Where am I here? Thinking about how oral archives can be a thing of evidence or, used as evidence or to create certain policies around, I don't know, refugees, for instance. I found that there was wonderful language around, again, academic around oral traditions and how important they are to especially a Palestinian community where everything, I mean, the culture is so much about, gathering around a table and talking, that these oral stories and laying witness and what is it like? Oh man, what is the word? But yeah, just telling someone what happened was super important, kind of like in the body and through the body and through the voice. So what I ended up doing is in my second year, I went to the American University of Beirut, where they house a huge library, an oral archive of Palestinian stories of leaving land in 48. And most of these stories are, of course, people who went to Lebanon. And I was comparing, so I went there and I went through hundreds of hours of oral stories. You could imagine it's super difficult. So, you go into a library, you read some books, you could flip through them pretty quickly to find what you're looking for. But with an oral archive, you actually have to sit there and listen and try to find the parts that you're searching for. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to find stories that were similar to my family stories. But I couldn't find them. The stories that were in the oral archives were a lot more polished than the ones that I had. And I was thinking, like, why? And the main difference was a lot of the testimonies, that's the word, testimonies from those oral archives came from people who were activists, who had jobs that were important, who were, cultural, important cultural figures. They also had a little more stability in their lives. Like they stayed in Lebanon, they got good jobs, etc. So I have a comparison here on stage. Pauline Saad has a very similar kind of move from Palestine to Lebanon. My uncle Fadi, same, so or not same, but lived in the same areas in Lebanon, but then moved to Canada. She was a teacher, and my family are mostly labor workers. So the importance of talking or recording their history is there's a difference there. Well, we know with a stable job and a stable life, you're able to reflect on the past. When you're hustling and running around daily, you don't have time to think about the past. And that's kind of where I felt like my role was, being in Pauline's position. Okay. But yeah, I wanted to really feel, I should read my notes because what I want to say. I found that the oral stories that I found really related, I really related to them, and it allowed my family's experience to feel real, because I haven't heard these stories from anyone else the way that these oral archives presented them. It was actually pretty wonderful. It felt validating to hear orally. Of course, you read it, but if you hear it, I don't know how to describe the experience, but it's just, you feel right, and you start to understand that this actually happened and that other people experienced it. It's like this collective bonding moment. There's like this sense of relief also from hearing the same story from two sources, of course. The repetition was everything for me. Yeah, they were kind of confirmed, gave me confidence and understanding that I didn't have previously. So now I could really kind of dive into them or think about them. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of these testimonies I was listening to, again, were extremely vivid. The speakers were remembering in hyper detail at times, unlike the stories I grew up with. But these narratives, although vivid, and although they're telling you a lot of information, and you're feeling these stories with the person who's saying them, some of these oral archives are video and some of them are sound. I preferred the video, of course, you get more out of them, for me at least. But yeah, it was actually a lot of them I also noticed were incomplete, right? You're always going to miss something when you're saying something orally. So a name, a place, you know, etc. So yeah, going through these archives and comparing them to my personal archives that I had at that time, everything I read about Palestinian history, I noticed that the narrative was still so unclear for me. I would even argue that it's so unclear today. You know, I'm constantly watching new documentaries and reading on Palestine and how it was colonized, and it feels like there was a magic trick, you know? It feels, I don't know, I guess colonialism does that, it like plays tricks. But yeah, I could also see the kind of active destruction taking place in the retelling of these stories. Of course, memory never is reliable. So yeah, but the incompleteness and the destruction I thought could be super generative. I loved the fact that memory destroys itself with every retelling. I even do this, you know, I have these tiny clips and I still kind of fumble through them and switch words up. So, you know, reading about all this stuff and going through these oral archives, I thought, you know, this is the drive of the paintings that I made in grad school. So I wanted to kind of find these puncture points and kind of illustrate their breaking and come up with new stuff in the blank spots. So yeah, I'm not going to talk directly about this work, but that's what I was thinking about when making these works. But yeah, I didn't like that they have kind of like I love that the paintings didn't have this kind of fixed form. I wanted to work, I wanted to work with them as like the oral stories as a liquid state and talk about Palestinian identity with a post-identity, post-national lens, of course. So this is a video I made in dialogue, or kind of talking about that. So what you're going to see is there's this figure who, again, same timeline as my family, or when my family was in Lebanon. He's riding a boat and he's with another person who you don't see in the frame. And they're trying to capture the image of the national monument, the Roche again, but they fail hardcore. So and it loops. So I'm going to just show you. So in an ideal viewing experience, it's just looping for hours. But I'm just going to show you like a minute, like a clip of it. So yeah, and it keeps going. Okay, so this is Sulaiman Mansour, a painter, a Palestinian painter who really created one of the few Palestinian painters creating a kind of national identity. His work has been prominent since 48. There's one image of a man, I'm showing a different painting here, I should have showed the other one, but it's okay, of a man carrying Jerusalem on his back. And this image was in every house in Palestine. And a lot of his paintings are depictions of land, and a lot of the work has symbols of, Palestinian identity and nationhood and etc. This is a great example of that. You see the Palestinian taupe, so the traditional dress, and then you have Jerusalem in the middle, and then you have the desert and sky in there as well. And yeah, a lot of Palestinian painters and filmmakers, because again, I was doing a lot of this programming for the festival, have been using images of the olive tree, for instance, in the map of Palestine, images of loss and sadness to fight against erasure. The problem I had with many of these artists and filmmakers, especially the ones working in different countries, is they were trying to stabilize the image of Palestine and really stabilize the history and especially stabilize the identity. It still happens now, of course. And I thought, oh, this is impossible. It's not, this is not what's actually happening. So yeah, there's also always this kind of depiction to return or reverse what happened to a better past day. But yeah, the hopelessness and the sadness and the sacrifice, like the sacrificial images were quite prominent. So I wondered, is there another kind of Palestinian? Is there another Palestinian visual language specifically? So yeah, I just, I wanted to create a Palestinian image that was uncertain, the way I was feeling, and most importantly, kind of transformable, plastic almost. I wanted to open up Palestinian narratives and symbols and icons, and sometimes bring them back to the everyday. I also asked, what does a Palestinian mean? There are, more Palestinians living outside of the land than there are in them. How do I refuse this kind of fixed identity? How do I embrace incompleteness and the transformation of this, this identity? So again, feeding off of what the archive kind of showed me or taught me. So that's why the paintings don't look quote unquote Palestinian. They are made by a Palestinian. They're hairy and dark because they're made by a Palestinian, but they do not depict Palestine or a Palestinian. Although this, there are figures that are present, but you can't point to them and say that is absolutely a Palestinian body. So yeah, the images I produce are hard to read because I like when the figure does not take an absolute form or the subject take an absolute form. I like this fluctuation between a single individual and multiple parts and multiple forms. The figure, the subject morph into objects and land and morph even into themselves, like this image that we see on projection. I love reading. Reading inspires me the most when it comes to creating image. Kind of funny, I process through image, but the images come from words, both heard and read. So yeah, I was reading a lot of Catherine Malabou, again, because I was in school still. I still read now, but it was much more intense, of course, when you're in school. And Catherine Malabou really extended the idea of transformation for me. She believed that a person can get rid of their kind of essence for a new person to emerge. She is a scientist. She works with Alzheimer's patients, and she really, talks about this kind of idea of losing your identity completely, where you don't remember who you are, what your memories are, how you learn something, and you become someone completely different. So looking at this theory made me realize that, as humans, we're capable of transformation. We're not fixed to our histories, our traumas, even our instincts. As I get older, I believe this less, but I still believe it. I wanted the paintings to kind of embrace this in their kind of fluidity and the fluid thoughts, and transform them freely, free them from even where they come from, these kind of oral stories or these meditations almost. But yeah, just a little more about transformation. So I was thinking about how an identity can also completely transform and change depending on what made it change. So if the trauma or the event is a positive one, then the transformation can possibly be or is a good one. And then the opposite is true. If the trauma that made you change is a bad one, then your transformation can be kind of destructive. But yeah, I also noticed that a lot of the images, and again, I was being super critical because I was in school and they make you do that, at least in Guelph. I was very much thinking like, oh, like some of the images I produce are actually quite problematic. And I was thinking about the drone image too, right? Yeah, like it actually sometimes doesn't empower me or anyone looking at it. It does possibly create guilt or sadness and shame. But again, if I can't work with these narratives, these family histories, and who can, and these kind of psychological moments of myself, then, who can? And yeah, and there's always a risk of that. Right? But yeah, Malabou states beautifully, and I love this quote, and I still love to share it. But yeah, we're capable of every mutation, unpredictable mutations, irreducible to the range of typology. Our plastic possibilities are actually never ending. But yeah, I find this text liberating, of course. And her ideas kind of, relinquish me from my essence and my past or inherited traumas and, this history that bogs me down, or yeah, I mean, the process. But yeah, also it made me really understand like how trauma warps narratives and fragments them, and how painting them again transforms them into new narratives and how they become fresh. So again, this kind of like the images become themselves, and they become just a thing that was produced in the process instead of it being bogged down by where it came from. All right, where am I here? All right, so working with Malabou's ideas of destructive plasticity. So this idea that, a trauma can create or produce something that is broken or fractured, and it changes you into something something that is kind of mirroring what the trauma was in a way. I was thinking a lot about death and how we kind of visualize an end to a person's life, how a person that passes suddenly has this kind of clear identity to them. It's no longer something, it becomes this kind of fixed form or fixed image or fixed person. Their contributions and their personality is always intensified. They become more charitable, more kind, more hardworking. For political deaths, their identity really solidifies. For instance, Shireen Abu Akleh, who was an influential and greatly admired Palestinian reporter for Al Jazeera for 25 years, who, anyways, I can go on. When she passed, her identity is solid. It's, her identity now defines her life and death as one for a liberated Palestine. Her identity is in the hands of a population and has become a kind of fixed national symbol. I am super interested in working with these are very new ideas. I'm still working through them. This work, it started in 2017, but the things I'm reading are very recent thoughts in the past 2 years or so. So I'm still working through them, and it's quite a complex, I don't know, the stuff I'm going through, I don't know, it feels like it could be a whole other talk, but I'm thinking about the link to between like Palestinian death and I don't know, and with Akil Mbambe's necropolitics, which I could summarize in a question, you know, whose life matters and who does not, who is disposable of and who is not. Yeah. So the work that you see here in 2017 was a body of work called In Memory of Mabid. Mabid is a fictional character that I wanted to make solid based off of a true, or based off of another oral story that my family has shared with me about a civilian death, a neighbor who passed from an airstrike. And my family kind of witnessed this sudden death. Okay, how am I for time? Okay, so I should, okay. I will stop there. Because I have, yeah, I was gonna, yeah, I'll stop there. Okay, I'll do it real quick. I'm gonna skip some of the harder stuff. Okay, quickly, I'm working, I have a lot of little small projects that I haven't fully finished or made public, but I thought it would be fun to show them. So I'm thinking about Sasquatches. This is something I worked in Banff, where I met Katie, but this is imagining my grandfather as someone who was a bare knuckle boxer in Beirut, who was this public figure who was always in the spotlight. But when he moved to Canada, he was the complete opposite. He hid and he never showed himself in public. He worked in a factory. He was, you know, very much like the Sasquatch. He would hide. He wouldn't want to be anywhere where there's a spotlight, which I found so fascinating. So I made these really like hairy, he was also very hairy. I mean, I'm very hairy Sasquatches to kind of to relate to that. I'm just gonna skip. I'm gonna skip mother storage. Okay, I did prepare too much. The last thing I want to share, because it's super fresh, is I started making these smash paintings, is what I call them. Just in the past year. Again, I haven't shared any of this work publicly, just still trying to sort through them. But I was thinking about the Rorschach test and how, again, it kind of, you know, the practice is you look at this image and it tells you who you are, what you're thinking of. It like builds your identity. And I love this idea that an image can be duplicated onto itself. And, you know, they become kind of like writing prompts for me, but they're also super fun to make. And I've been making them obsessively. Anyways, I will stop there. I swear I timed this and it was 20 minutes, but okay. You know.
So we are now going to proceed into this moment where we open up the Zoom feed. If I can find the mouse. For some reason, it likes to disappear. Here. Let me just exit. You can see it, Kosar? Ha. So we'll open it up to questions from the room and also questions from Zoom. Zoom folks, just so you know, you are on screen right now. Maybe. Where are we?
I think maybe because it's hidden, maybe unhide it. I don't know.
Is it? No, it's not. It's unlike any Zoom experience that I have ever had. It's like I haven't been doing this for 4 years.
Feels like 4.
What's going on, Beth? Anything I can help with?
Oh, I can't get the gallery view. I can't see anybody.
Oh, I've got the gallery view. That's peculiar. Oh,
Anyway, we'll fake it till we make it. So if you have a question and you're on Zoom, just type the word question in the chat and you can either have the opportunity to write out your question or speak it aloud into the microphone. We'll ask you to unmute and we're going to do our best to repeat back the questions that are coming from the room so that the folks on Zoom can understand them. If you don't want to do that, because sometimes it's very hard to reprocess the questions, I've been told I'm okay at it, so we'll figure it out. Oh, Kosar's gonna do it. Kosar, thank you. So yeah, do we have anybody in the queue? Have to forgive us. It's the last week of term. So everybody's on their last threads.
At least
Cool.
they show up. My class doesn't show up, but yeah. Yeah. I mean, my family don't know art. So when they look at my work, they don't see the things this room sees, of course, because we're trained. And also they're not overt, so they aren't, you know, they don't, I mean, the actual work isn't engaged with as much with my family, but the process of, you know, talking to them about what I'm doing is really interesting to me because, again, I'm talking an academic. I was trained here, 2 universities. So when I'm talking about my work with them, it's very much, I don't know how to describe it. It's just like, you know, I'm doing this thing because I love you, and that's all they need to hear, you know. Yeah, I mean, they understand the politics, but not when it comes to, you know, the stuff like Catherine Malabou and such. They won't. I mean, I almost don't care, you know. So yeah, it's very much the way the family functions is just love each other and they support me whenever. But yeah. Yeah. They have no opinions, basically. I get that question a lot, though.
So, had the opportunity to show this work in Palestine. Like, I'm curious about this, the difference between work that's surrounding this idea of identity for diaspora and how that work is read or experienced by people who have that.
Yeah. I mean, these are really interesting questions, and I'm not sure. I don't know if I can answer that completely, but with my experience with the film festival, I can talk about how film works in that space. It is very separate. There are so many different Palestinian identities, you know, the people who live in Europe and North America, even inside Palestine, you know, people who live in the West Bank versus inside Israel. Like, there is a huge difference in opinion, in taste, in what is right to talk about and what is wrong to talk about. I think my work is very much for a Canadian audience, for a North American audience, for you know, someone who has the same kind of education and lived experience as I do, or who's in the fields of the visual arts. I mean, of course, it would be interesting to show there. I could hardly get my work out of Canada, but you know.
The idea is that you, when you associate with the drawing, because it gives you that distance, that distance from that place, you can see it differently. And that, I think that I would imagine would be a valuable addition to the history, the art history of the Palestinian.
Yeah, and there's so much good work out there. So many, you know, Palestinians in the diaspora making exceptional work, especially again in film, which is my experience. And I mentor filmmakers as well for in the festival, and the stuff they're coming up with, like, it's amazing. You know, you think, oh, it's so small and in the world. There's only so much you could talk about, but there are new narratives coming out and new ways of approaching what's happening there, like with every artist, you know, like it's kind of amazing the diversity of just thought and process around Palestine. I mean, scholars, like, name one scholar who hasn't talked about Palestine or written about Palestine, or, you know, it's such a topic, although no one can solve the, you know, solve whatever it is. But yeah, it is it's so productive. I mean, that's the only reason there is Palestinian art is because of the colonization, unfortunately, you know, or an international Palestinian art. Yeah. Yeah, and the conflict itself, you know, like, everyone wants to talk about it, everyone wants to make work about it. You know, a lot of artists are just inspired by it and make, you know, it's the whole, like, with war, there's more art, and that's real. That's super real.
We're also curious about your feelings while you are painting, and I just want to know that, has it been to the point that you wanted to stop painting rather than doing it because of all the resentment toward creating these paintings?
Sorry, let me try and understand. Like, stop painting because
Yeah, the guilt.
the guilt. Oh.
Yeah. Thought that by producing this imaginary pictures that are producing guilt and you know, those things that you said, did it make you stop wanting to paint, or?
Yeah, no, it doesn't stop me from painting, unfortunately, or fortunately. No, I mean, I think the thing is, like, yes, it's hard to work in this way. But, you know, I'm able to, you know, it results in something bigger than me, right? It's adding to the dialogue. You know, I'm here and sharing stuff about Palestine, you know. There's so many moments where, I mean, that Palestinians, even the Palestinian, like, Palestinians in the diaspora are being, like, silenced. And yeah, if I were to just, you know, not make and have a public presence, then what good is that, right? So yeah, it is, I like to think of it as something bigger than me, you know, something that hopefully not change something, but at least, you know, allow for things, again, to shift when it comes to the dialogues around these things, or add diversity to the conversations. Yeah. No problem. movement is always better than being stable, right?
Thanks for doing better, especially when we go back to that mentality that you see through. There's like a classroom go back. I'm curious what your experience with the word being particularly attached to identity or context that maybe you would understood always. That's a discussion that is found in the present here and school. And you know, it's sort of again like your work being so much around identity, things that shift from talking about the work itself, rather than talking about and instead talking about the history or politics around it. I don't know, I'm wondering if you could share with that, like how did you find that? Was there things that you felt where you felt it was more challenging for you to go through the process, and or maybe you still find that you can talk about your work in a specific way that maybe you want to avoid. And I'm going to write my question in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think my work, yeah, I mean, it's painting, it's oil on panel. Anyone can talk about it, which is what I love about painting. It's like very accessible for me, at least for making it. And it's why I'm drawn to it, and for someone to come in or with even the tiniest bit of knowledge of painting. At first, of course, it's hard to, I mean, even if I were to present anything, to get it critiqued. The thing about how I work with the personal is that I do kind of sever it from myself. I don't know if that's good or bad, but the drone thing is real. Like that's, it feels that way, that there is this kind of separation. But you know, I don't get critiqued. I haven't been critiqued since I graduated, and the work has become more and more personal. I didn't even get to the non-academic stuff, which is like one-liners, right? Like I made this because I love my mama, you know, like, so, and you know, you could of course make it more complicated and more academic, and it touches on this stuff. But yeah, I think I don't know, the separation is important. Yeah.
Explain something to
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, so much. Yeah. I don't want to gossip. But yeah, of course. I mean, but I don't expect anyone to know this stuff, right? It's not like everyone should know what happened in Palestine or Lebanon. I think I'm more generous than that. And I think it's important to be open to, you know, people who have different kind of views in politics and who don't know this stuff, you know, so it's a good opportunity to teach too. Yeah. Problem. Thanks for the question. Are there questions here? I think so. Do I read them?
That's supposed to be.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I want to ask further about the guilt.
Yeah.
The gossip. Maybe the gossip can be after. But just to sort of, I think like in a broader context in terms of this space and people generating visual material that maybe is incorporates pleasure and beauty and like sensuousness and joy in this time, you know, that there is sometimes, whether it's because it's an academic context or because of the very real pressures of the world that we live inside of, I think that sense of guilt is something that in many ways many of us can relate to, if not in the specific context that you describe. And I feel like I want, I feel really empathetic to this space of, it's something that I do too, where I talk around work. And then there was this aspect of me that's like, I want to see your paintings. Like, I love your paintings.
Yeah.
And I guess I just want to hear you speak, flesh out a little bit about that tension, because there is so much, not that the paintings are easy, but there is so much about them that is, like, when I hear you say, this one is about, I love my mom, you know, like, there's so much about the paintings that without the context, that I can feel through them. So I'm hoping that you can speak to that tension, that space a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it comes from a radical side of me, right? I'm always trying to like fight against the grain. And there's this, we have to de-aestheticize, political work, and, identity politics has to be white and gray and black and maybe a little bit of beige. So to me, it's kind of like, it's like, what is the human side of this? So a lot of these works come from like deep meditations of these stories and what comes out, because there's so much attached to these people I absolutely love, and words from people that like I can't imagine a life without. The paintings tend to be beautiful, right? They come from the gut. They come from this immediate like hand to page moment. The kind of love for color and for like seeing beauty, right? That's all human, and we ignore it somehow for some reason in academia. So yeah, these kind of like, the flowers and the color, especially, and the ornamentation brings that in, makes you feel, makes your gut, turn sometimes. And also the work is very much like bodily too. So yeah, really thinking about, again, hair and being female, and, again, just embodying myself. So yeah, they're, they can be portraits in a way too. I want to look beautiful. But yeah. Thank you. I try.
Any other questions from the room or from the chat? Okay, thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you.